The conference room hummed with the low murmur of voices and the clink of glasses. It was the company's quarterly celebration, a rare moment when the rigid walls of corporate hierarchy softened just enough for laughter to slip through. Elena Grant stood near the head of the long mahogany table, a glass of sparkling water in her hand, her posture relaxed but commanding. She was the CEO, and everyone knew it even when she smiled. She was 38, composed, and sharp in ways that made people hesitate before speaking to her. Her dark blazer was perfectly tailored. Her hair was pulled back with the kind of precision that suggested control over every detail of her life. She had built this company with her own hands, and she wore that accomplishment like armor. Across the room, Marcus Reed stood near the window, half-shadowed by the late afternoon light. He was 42, broad-shouldered but quiet, the kind of man people forgot was in the room until he spoke. He didn't speak often. He worked in operations, reliable, steady, invisible. He wore a simple button-down shirt and khakis, nothing that drew attention. His hands were calloused in a way that suggested he'd worked with them long before he ever sat behind a desk. He held a cup of coffee, not champagne. He didn't drink anymore, not since Lily was born. Someone near the table made a joke about office romance, and the room erupted in laughter. Elena smiled, leaning casually against the table's edge. "Careful," she said lightly. "You all know I'm still single. One of you might end up stuck with me." More laughter. Someone whistled. Another voice chimed in. "Come on, Ms. Grant, you'd never settle for any of us." Elena's eyes swept the room, and then, almost absently, they landed on Marcus. "What about you, Reed?" she said, her tone playful, teasing. "Think you could handle marrying the boss?" The room fell into a ripple of amused chuckles. A few people turned to look at Marcus, grinning, waiting for him to stammer or deflect. It was a joke. Everyone knew it was a joke. Marcus looked at her. He didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He just held her gaze, steady and calm. "What if I say yes?" The laughter died instantly. Elena blinked. Her smile faltered, just for a second. The room felt suddenly smaller, quieter. A few people glanced at each other, unsure if they'd heard him correctly. Marcus didn't look away. His voice had been soft, but it carried weight. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't a joke. It was a question. Elena recovered quickly, lifting her glass with a light laugh. "Well," she said, her voice smooth again, "I suppose I'd have to take that seriously." The tension broke. People laughed again, louder this time, as if trying to erase the strange moment. Someone clapped Marcus on the shoulder. The conversation shifted, but Elena didn't move. She stood there, glass in hand, watching Marcus as he turned back toward the window. Something had shifted. She didn't know what, but she felt it. That night, Elena sat alone in her penthouse apartment, the city lights glittering below her like stars fallen to earth. She poured herself a glass of wine she didn't drink and stared at her reflection in the darkened window. She thought about the way Marcus had looked at her. Not with awe, not with fear, just steadiness. Like he'd already considered the question long before she'd asked it. It unsettled her. She was used to men who wanted something from her, her power, her money, her name. She was used to being seen as a prize or a threat. But Marcus had looked at her like she was just a person. She didn't know what to do with that. Marcus drove home in silence, the radio off, the hum of the engine the only sound. His hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. He shouldn't have said it. He shouldn't have answered her like that. But when she'd asked, when her voice had floated across the room, light and careless, something inside him had cracked open. Just a little. Just enough. He pulled into the driveway of a small, neat house on the edge of town. The porch light was on. The lawn was mowed. Everything was in order because it had to be. Inside, his daughter was waiting. Lily was 7 years old, small for her age, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes that seemed too old for a child. She sat on the couch, a stuffed rabbit in her lap, staring at the television without really watching it. Marcus knelt in front of her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly. "How was your day?" She didn't answer. She hadn't spoken in 2 years. Not since her mother died. Marcus didn't push. He never did. He just kissed her forehead and sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her small shoulders. They sat together in the quiet, the flickering light of the television the only movement in the room. This was his life. This was all that mattered. And yet, for the first time in a long time, Marcus found himself thinking about someone else. The next morning, Elena arrived at the office early, as she always did. She liked the stillness of the building before everyone else arrived, the way her footsteps echoed in the empty halls. She made herself coffee in the executive lounge and opened her laptop. But her mind kept drifting. She thought about Marcus's daughter. She'd heard rumors, whispers in the break room, fragments of gossip. His wife had died. Cancer, someone said. He'd raised the little girl alone ever since. Elena had never thought much about it. She didn't think much about anyone's personal life. It wasn't her job to care. But now, she couldn't stop wondering. What kind of man raises a child alone and still shows up every day, quiet and steady, never asking for anything? What kind of man looks a CEO in the eye and says, "What if I say yes?" The days that followed felt strange to Elena, as if the air in the building had changed texture. She found herself noticing Marcus in ways she hadn't before. The way he moved through the halls without hurry. The way he listened when people spoke, his attention full and unhurried. The way he left every evening at exactly 5 o'clock. No exceptions, no apologies. She asked her assistant, Nora, about him one afternoon. "Marcus Reed," Nora said, glancing up from her tablet. "Operations manager. Been here about 4 years. Solid employee. Never late, never complains. Keeps to himself mostly. Does he have family?" Elena asked, keeping her tone casual. Nora hesitated. "A daughter, I think. His wife passed away a few years ago. I don't know much else. He doesn't really talk about it." Elena nodded, filing the information away. She told herself it was professional curiosity. She told herself it didn't matter. But she kept thinking about the way he'd looked at her, like she was real. Marcus tried not to think about Elena Grant. He had enough to manage. Lily had started refusing breakfast again, which meant he had to wake up earlier, try different foods, coax her gently without pushing. Mornings were a careful dance, and he'd learned the steps through trial and error. He dropped her off at school, watched her walk through the doors without looking back, and felt the familiar ache in his chest. She was so small, so quiet, so alone even in a room full of children. He wanted to fix it. He wanted to fix everything. But he didn't know how. At work, he kept his head down. He avoided the break room, avoided the gossip, avoided the curious glances from coworkers who'd been in the conference room that day. He didn't regret what he'd said, but he didn't want to explain it either. Then, one afternoon, Elena appeared at his desk. She didn't knock. She just stood there, hands in the pockets of her tailored slacks, her expression unreadable. "Reed," she said. He looked up, startled. "Ms. Grant, do you have a minute?" It wasn't really a question. He stood, smoothing his shirt, and followed her down the hall to a small meeting room. She closed the door behind them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Elena leaned against the table, arms crossed, studying him with the kind of intensity that made most people uncomfortable. Marcus didn't look away. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began. "I shouldn't have. I'm not finished." He fell silent. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "You didn't laugh. Everyone else did, but you didn't. Why?" Marcus exhaled slowly. He could have deflected. He could have lied. But something about the way she was looking at him, like she actually wanted to know, made him tell the truth. "Because I don't think marriage is a joke," he said quietly. "And I don't think you were really joking." Elena's expression flickered, just for a second. Then she straightened, her armor sliding back into place. "That's a bold assumption," she said. "Maybe." She studied him a moment longer, then nodded once, as if deciding something. "I want to understand you, Reed," she said. "You intrigue me, and I don't say that lightly." Marcus's chest tightened. I'm not that interesting, Miss Grant. Elena, she corrected. And I'll be the judge of that. She left without another word, the door clicking softly behind her. Marcus stood there in the empty room, his heart beating a little too fast. Over the following weeks, something shifted between them. It was subtle at first. A glance across the office, a brief conversation in the elevator, a shared moment of silence that felt less awkward than it should have. Elena began stopping by Marcus's desk more often. She asked him questions not about work, but about life. What did he do on weekends? What did he think about the new policy? Did he like his coffee black or with cream? He answered honestly without pretense. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't perform. He was just himself. And Elena, who had spent years surrounded by people performing, found it deeply disarming. One evening, she stayed late at the office. Most of the building had emptied, but she saw a light still on in the operations wing. She walked down the hall and found Marcus at his desk, reviewing spreadsheets. "It's past 5, she said from the doorway. He looked up, surprised. "I had to finish something. Lily's at a friend's house tonight." Elena stepped inside, glancing at the papers on his desk. "You don't have to explain yourself to me. I know." She sat down in the chair across from him, crossing her legs. "Tell me about her. Your daughter." Marcus's hands stilled on the keyboard. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then quietly he did. "Her name is Lily. She's 7. She hasn't spoken since her mother died." Elena's expression softened. "I'm sorry. So am I. What do the doctors say?" "That she's not ready. That it's trauma. That I need to be patient." His voice was steady, but there was pain beneath it. "I'm trying. But I don't know if I'm enough." Elena leaned forward slightly. "You're still here. You show up every day. That's more than enough." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and something passed between them, recognition maybe, understanding. "Thank you," he said quietly. Elena stood, smoothing her jacket. "Good night, Marcus." "Good night, Elena." As she walked away, Marcus realized something had changed. She wasn't just his boss anymore. She was someone he was beginning to trust. And that terrified him. The rumors started quietly, the way they always did. A glance here, a whisper there. A knowing smile exchanged in the break room. People noticed when Elena Grant stopped by Marcus Reed's desk. They noticed when she called him by his first name. They noticed when she laughed at something he said, softly, genuinely, in a way she never did with anyone else. And they talked. Marcus heard the whispers. He saw the looks. He ignored them as best he could. He had no interest in office politics, no energy to defend himself against speculation. He came to work, did his job, and went home to his daughter. That was all that mattered. But Elena couldn't ignore it as easily. One morning, her CFO, David Brennan, knocked on her office door. He was a sharp man in his 50s, all business and no warmth. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. Elena looked up from her laptop, already annoyed. About optics." She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Go on." David sat down, folding his hands carefully. "People are talking about you and Reed. Let them talk. Elena, you're the CEO. Every move you make is scrutinized. If this becomes a problem..." "It's not a problem," she said sharply. "Marcus is a good employee. I'm allowed to have a conversation with him." "Of course you are. But you're also allowed to be smart about how it looks." Elena's jaw tightened. "Are you telling me how to run my company, David?" "I'm telling you to protect it. And yourself." He left. Elena sat alone in her office, staring at the city skyline. She hated that he was right. She hated that something as simple as kindness, as connection, could be weaponized. But more than that, she hated that she was starting to care what people thought. Because it meant she cared about Marcus. And that was dangerous. That evening, Marcus picked Lily up from school. She climbed into the back seat without a word, clutching her stuffed rabbit. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Silence. He tried again. "Did you draw anything today?" I know you like art class. Still nothing. Marcus's chest ached. He wanted so badly to hear her voice. Just once. Just his name. They drove home in quiet. He made dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup, her favorite, and set it in front of her. She ate slowly, mechanically, her eyes distant. After dinner, he sat beside her on the couch. He read her a story, the same one he read every night, about a brave little girl who found her way home. Lily leaned against him, her small body warm and trusting. Marcus wrapped his arm around her and closed his eyes. He didn't know how to fix her, but he knew how to love her. And for now, that had to be enough. The next day, Elena made a decision. She couldn't keep tiptoeing around this. She couldn't keep pretending she wasn't curious, wasn't drawn to him, wasn't wondering what it would be like to let someone in again. She found Marcus in the parking garage at the end of the day. He was unlocking his car, his briefcase slung over one shoulder. "Marcus," she called. He turned, surprised. "Elena." She walked toward him, her heels clicking against the concrete. "I need to ask you something." "Okay." She hesitated, then spoke. "Why did you really say yes that day? In the conference room?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he set his briefcase down and leaned against his car. "Because I've spent the last 2 years putting one foot in front of the other," he said quietly. "Taking care of Lily, going to work, coming home, surviving, and I've been fine with that. But when you asked me that question, even as a joke, it made me realize something." "What?" "That I'm tired of just surviving. I want to live again, and I don't know if that's possible. But when you looked at me, I thought, maybe." Elena's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected honesty that raw, that real. "I don't know if I'm the right person for that," she said softly. "I don't know either. But I think you're the only person who's ever really seen me." Elena stepped closer. "I'm scared, Marcus." "So am I." They stood there in the dim light of the parking garage. Two people who had been alone for so long, they'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. "Would you like to have dinner?" she asked. "Nothing formal. Just dinner." Marcus smiled, small and genuine. "I'd like that." "Bring Lily," Elena added. "I'd like to meet her." Something in Marcus's expression shifted, surprise, maybe hope. "Okay," he said. "Okay." The dinner was at a quiet Italian restaurant on the edge of town. Elena arrived first, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, trying not to look as nervous as she felt. Marcus arrived with Lily. The little girl clung to his hand, her eyes wide and wary. She wore a yellow dress and carried her stuffed rabbit. Elena stood, smiling gently. "Hi, Lily. I'm Elena." Lily didn't respond. She pressed closer to her father. Marcus squeezed her hand. "It's okay, sweetheart. She's a friend." They sat down. The waitress brought breadsticks and water. Elena didn't push. She didn't try to force conversation. She just talked to Marcus, naturally, easily, as if Lily wasn't shrinking into the booth beside him. But halfway through the meal, Elena noticed something. Lily was watching her. Not with fear, with curiosity. Elena smiled at her. "Do you like drawing, Lily?" The little girl didn't answer, but she nodded. Just once. Elena's heart swelled. It was such a small thing, but it felt enormous. She pulled a napkin from the table and a pen from her purse. She drew a simple flower, just a circle and a few petals. Then she slid the napkin toward Lily. "Can you draw one too?" Lily looked at her father. Marcus nodded gently. "It's okay." Slowly, carefully, Lily picked up the pen. She drew a flower beside Elena's. It was shaky, imperfect, beautiful. Elena smiled. "That's lovely." For the first time that night, Lily smiled back. After that dinner, something between the three of them began to grow. It wasn't fast. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, and careful, like a seedling pushing through soil. Elena started joining them more often. A weekend trip to the park. A movie at Marcus's house. A quiet afternoon where Lily sat coloring at the kitchen table while Marcus and Elena drank coffee and talked about nothing important. Elena learned how to be still, how to exist in a space without needing to control it, How to sit beside a silent child and not try to fix her. Just be present. Lily, in turn, began to notice her. She didn't speak, but she started sitting closer. She brought Elena her drawings. She let Elena braid her hair one Sunday morning, sitting patiently on the couch while Marcus made pancakes. And Marcus watched it all with a mix of wonder and fear, because for the first time in years he felt something other than exhaustion. He felt hope, but hope was dangerous. At work, the whispers grew louder. Elena's assistant, Nora, pulled her aside one afternoon. "People are starting to ask questions," Nora said carefully, "about you and Marcus." Elena kept her expression neutral. "What kind of questions? Whether there's something happening, whether it's appropriate." Elena's jaw tightened. "What I do outside this office is none of their business." "I know, but you're the CEO. Everything is their business." Elena hated that she was right. That evening, she sat across from Marcus at his kitchen table, while Lily played quietly in the living room. She told him about the conversation. Marcus set down his coffee. "Do you want to stop seeing me?" "No," Elena said immediately. "But I don't want this to hurt you either. Or Lily." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. "Elena, I've lived my whole life trying not to be a burden, trying not to ask for too much, trying not to take up space. But I'm tired of being invisible. I don't care what they say. Care about you. And I care about what we're building here." Elena's throat tightened. "I care too." "Then let them talk." She nodded, squeezing his hand. "Okay." A few days later, Elena received a formal complaint. It was anonymous, filed through HR, accusing her of favoritism and inappropriate conduct with an employee. She read it in her office, her hands trembling with anger. It was vague, cowardly, and designed to sow doubt. She called David Brennan into her office. "Did you file this?" she asked, holding up the paper. David didn't flinch. "No, but I warned you this would happen." "Then who did? Does it matter? The board is going to see it, and they're going to ask questions." Elena stood, her voice sharp. "Then let them ask. I've done nothing wrong." "Elena, you're risking everything." "For what? For being kind to someone? For letting myself care about another human being? If that's a crime, then I'll take the punishment." David left. Elena sat alone, her chest tight, her mind racing. She wasn't going to let them take this from her. She wasn't going to let fear win. That weekend, Elena took Marcus and Lily to the botanical gardens. It was a clear, warm day, the kind where the world felt open and forgiving. They walked through rows of flowers, Lily running ahead, her rabbit tucked under her arm. Elena watched her, smiling. "She's happy." Marcus nodded. "She is. Because of you. Because of us," Elena corrected. They stopped near a fountain, sitting on a stone bench while Lily crouched by the water, watching the koi swim lazy circles. Marcus looked at Elena. "I need to tell you something." She turned to him, suddenly nervous. "What?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying. Elena's breath caught. "Marcus, I know it's complicated. I know it's risky, but I can't pretend anymore. I love you, Elena. And if that scares you, I understand. But I needed you to know." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "It does scare me," she whispered. "But I love you too." They sat there, hands clasped, while Lily played in the sunlight. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And for the first time in years, Elena felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The following Monday, Elena walked into the boardroom for a scheduled meeting. The complaint had reached the board, and she knew they'd want answers. She stood at the head of the table, calm and composed, while 7 pairs of eyes watched her. David spoke first. "Elena, we need to address the concerns that have been raised. I'm aware. Are you in a relationship with Marcus Reed?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." The room shifted. A few board members exchanged glances. "And you don't see that as a conflict of interest?" another member asked. No, Elena said firmly. Marcus is not in my direct chain of command. He receives no special treatment. His performance is evaluated by his manager, not by me. I have maintained every professional boundary required by company policy. But the appearance, Elena interrupted, is that I'm a human being. I'm allowed to have a personal life, and I will not apologize for it. David leaned forward. Elena, no one is asking you to apologize, but we have to consider. What? That I'm not allowed to care about someone? That being CEO means I have to be alone. The room fell silent. Elena took a breath, steadying herself. I've given everything to this company. I've sacrificed time, relationships, my own health. And I'll keep doing that. But I will not sacrifice the possibility of happiness. If that's a problem, then maybe I'm not the right person for this job. No one spoke. Finally, the board chair, an older woman named Margaret, leaned back in her chair. No one's asking you to step down, Elena, she said quietly. But we are asking you to be careful. For your sake and for his. Elena nodded. I understand. The meeting ended. Elena walked out, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. But she'd done it. She'd stood her ground. That evening, Marcus made dinner while Lily sat at the table, coloring. Elena arrived just after 6, still dressed in her work clothes, her face tired but soft. Marcus kissed her cheek. How did it go? They know, she said. But I told them the truth. And I'm not backing down. Marcus pulled her into his arms. I'm sorry you had to do that. I'm not. They ate together, the three of them, in the warm glow of the kitchen. Lily showed Elena her latest drawing, a house with 3 stick figures standing in front of it. Elena's chest tightened. Is that us? Lily nodded, smiling shyly. Elena looked at Marcus, her eyes shining. He squeezed her hand. After dinner, they sat on the couch. Lily climbed into Elena's lap, curling against her like she'd done it 100 times before. Elena stroked her hair gently, humming softly. Marcus watched them, his heart full to breaking. This was what he'd been afraid to hope for. This was what he thought he'd lost forever. And somehow, impossibly, it was here. A few weeks later, the 3 of them went to the beach. It was a cloudy Saturday, the ocean gray and restless. But Lily didn't care. She ran along the shore, her rabbit forgotten in the sand, her laughter bright and wild. Elena and Marcus walked behind her, hands linked. She's healing, Elena said softly. So am I, Marcus replied. Elena stopped, turning to face him. The wind whipped her hair around her face. She looked at him with everything she'd been too afraid to say. Marry me, she said. Marcus blinked. What? Marry me? For real this time? He stared at her, stunned. Elena, I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. But I don't care. I love you. I love Lily. And I don't want to waste another second pretending I don't. Marcus's throat tightened. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing her cheek. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He kissed her, slow and deep, tasting salt and promise. When they pulled apart, Lily was standing a few feet away, watching them. Her eyes were wide, her expression serious. Elena knelt down in front of her. Is it okay if I stay, Lily? If I'm part of your family? For a long moment, the little girl said nothing. Then, in a voice so soft it was almost lost in the wind, she spoke. Stay. It was one word, but it was everything. Elena's tears spilled over. She pulled Lily into her arms, holding her tight. Marcus knelt beside them, wrapping both of them in his embrace. They stayed there on the beach, tangled together, while the waves crashed and the sky opened above them. Months later, Elena and Marcus stood in a small chapel surrounded by a handful of people who mattered. Lily stood between them, holding both their hands, wearing a white dress and a flower crown. There were no grand speeches, no elaborate ceremony, just quiet vows, spoken with trembling voices and full hearts. I choose you, Elena whispered, every day, for the rest of my life. I choose you, Marcus replied, And I'll never stop. They kissed, and Lily giggled, and the small gathering clapped. Afterward, they went home, to the house that was now theirs, the life they were building together. That night, after Lily was asleep, Elena and Marcus sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. Do you ever think about that day? Elena asked. In the conference room? Marcus smiled. Every day. Do you regret it? Not for a second. Elena rested her head on his shoulder. I thought I had everything, but I didn't. Not until I had you. Marcus kissed her hair. You didn't just marry me, Elena. You saved me. No, she said softly. We saved each other. And in the quiet of the night, with the stars above them and their daughter sleeping safely inside, they held each other close. Because love, real love, wasn't about power or perfection. It was about showing up. It was about choosing each other, even when it was hard. It was about building something beautiful from the broken pieces. And they had done that, together.